Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's lecture. This lecture is the second part on solar myth and is focused on the best practice on communication for debunking the myths. I would like to thank the International Solar Alliance and the Clean Energy Solutions Center who facilitate this webinar series. Some background from me: before I joined Factor in 2010, I have been Director for Policy and Finance in the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. I was responsible for the Coalition for Action project at IRENA, aiming to increase social acceptance of renewable energy by improving communication. Previously, as a Spanish civil servant, I have been involved in many national and European regulations for the promotion of renewable energies and energy efficiency. This training is part of the Module 6 on socioeconomic aspects of solar energy and focuses on debunking the solar myths. In this module, we will always start with a brief description on debunking the solar myths, and afterward we will jump into the main body of the presentation on the best practices to communicate renewables in general and solar in particular. Don't forget, at the end of the presentation, you will be given the chance to test your knowledge with a little quiz. The learning objective which this module aims to provide can be divided into two: best practice in debunking the renewable myths and best practice in communicating renewable energies. A common misconception about the myths is the notion that removing its influence is as simple as packing more information to people's heads. This approach assumes that public misperceptions are due to a lack of knowledge and that the solution is more information. Inside communication is known as the information deficit model. But that model is wrong. People don't process information as simply as a hard drive downloading data. Refuting misinformation involves dealing with complex cognitive processes. To successfully impart knowledge, communicators need to understand how people process information, how they modify their existing knowledge, and how worldwide their availability to think rationally. It's not just people think that matters, but how they think. There is also an added complication. Not only is misinformation difficult to remove, debunking a myth can actually strengthen it in people's minds. Several different backfire effects have been observed, arising from making it more familiar, from providing too many arguments, or from providing evidence that threatens one's worldview. In communication, bear in mind the importance of the swing votes in the general population. Some will never support renewable energy, some will always do. Campaigns can affect most the views of those who remain undecided, or can move those already in favor of taking action. The main body of this module divided in two parts. In the first one, we will present the best practices on debunking the myths. And second one, we will put the focus on concrete communication practices and communication campaigns that will support us in debunking the solar myths. But first, I would like to review some of the concepts that we have already explained in the previous part, in the first part, on what is a myth, what is a public concern, what are the misconceptions. So as discussed in the previous lecture on solar myth, public concerns and solar energy can primarily classify into two groups: those which may be legitimate to address and those based on misconceptions about the technology. Legitimate concerns, even though solar and energy can support the mitigation of very environmental and social impacts originated from conventional energy production and consumption, it is still important to pinpoint that very large-scale deployment may also generate negative impacts and externalities. This is the case, for instance, of large-scale deployment of rooftop PV with batteries, how we are going to handle at the end of the life all this equipment. This legitimate concern has to be addressed differently than the myths, and are very important that we address these legitimate concerns. Misconception or myths is a view or an opinion made based on false understanding or interpretation of a particular phenomenon. The basis of this group of public concerns can be further distinguished between an intentional misinterpretation and an intentional misinformation. An intentional misinterpretation is largely a result of knowledge gap, which may be arising when solar energy is not communicated properly to the public due to lagging in quality or amount of information. People may believe low-quality information from unprofessional and unreliable sources, which may look relatively easy or convenient to understand, while factual information may be communicated in an unclear or unnecessarily complex way to the audience so that they cannot or are not willing to take it. Misconceptions also originate from intentional misinformation, which may be provided by vested interests who create poorly rooted claims and stories that mislead scientific evidence. They may do cherry-picking of evidence while not showing a full spectrum of facts. Extensive efforts for proliferating false claims via different media could create serious imbalance in decision-making. Debunking the myth is problematic. Unless great care is taken, any effort to debunk misinformation can inadvertently reinforce the very myths one seeks to correct. To avoid these backfire effects, an effective debunking requires three major elements. First, the refutation must focus on core facts rather than the myth to avoid the misinformation becoming more familiar. Second, any mention of a myth should be preceded by explicit warning to notify the reader that the upcoming information is false. Finally, the refutation should include an alternative explanation that accounts for important qualities in the original misinformation. If we don't follow this advice, then we could reinforce the myth, we could fall in one of the three main backfire effects: familiarity, overkill, and worldview backfire effect. With regards to familiarity backfire effect, when a myth is referred in the communication material aiming for debunking, the reader may become even more familiar with it, reinforcing their current belief. The headline and the content of the material would be better focused on facts while having the reference to the myth embedded within the facts, or providing an early warning about the falseness of the myth before mentioning its myth. Overkill backfire effect. A simple myth statement may be cognitively more attractive for the reader than overly complicated evidence or an overwhelming amount of facts. A solution is to keep the content short and easy to read, using simple languages and selected information with graphics. Worldview backfire effect. For people who have a strong belief, the straight provision of counter-arguments may rather strengthen their views even more. Prompting self-information makes people feel good and more receptive to messages that otherwise would be blocked by their views. One of the solutions is to frame the conveyed information to a less provocative or threatening to the views of the recipient. Otherwise, it could be better focus the advocacy on the majority that does not associate their opinion strongly to a particular view rather than an unviable minority. Once the myth is weakened in the recipient's mind, an alternative narrative should be immediately replace the gap. It would be vital to provide an alternative causal explanation for why the myth is wrong and why misinformers created the myth in the first place. An effective debunking material requires core facts. A refutation should emphasize the facts, not the myth. Present only key facts to avoid an overkill backfire effect. Explicit warnings before any mention of myth, as we have already mentioned, not to reinforce this myth with the backfire effect. Alternative explanation. Any gaps left by the debunking need to be filled. This may be achieved by providing an alternative causal explanation for why the myth is wrong, and optionally, why the misinformer prompted the myth in the first place. Graphics, core facts should be displayed graphically if possible. In the slide, we have an example on debunking the myths related on the myth that there is no scientific consensus about man-made global warming, because 31,000 scientists signed a petition stating that there is no evidence that human activity can disrupt climate. In this material for debunking the myth, in the very first beginning, there is a core fact communicated in a headline. 97 out of 100 climate experts agree humans are causing global warming. So there is no any reference on the myths here. Secondly, there is more information also giving core facts more detailed for people that want to go depth into this knowledge. And then the core fact is reinforced in opening paragraph, fleshed out with additional details. Several independent surveys find 97% of climate science who are actively publishing peer-reviewed climate research agree that humans are causing global warming. The main part of the material is the graphic. Core fact is reinforced with graphic. On the bottom part, we have the explicit warning cueing reader that misinformation is coming and indicating the nature of the misinformation. Then the myth is quoted. And finally, the gap created by this debunking is how can there be a consensus of verified scientific dissent? This gap is filled with explaining that almost all the science are not climate scientific. Advocates of renewable energy increasingly recognize the importance of addressing public concerns and diminishing misconceptions surrounding renewable energy technology so as to ensure there is smoother and faster deployment. A number of communication initiatives to improve public awareness and disseminate relevant evidence have already been rolled out by diverse advocates, including renewable energy manufacturers, utilities, industry associations, public agencies, civil society, and community groups. In the slide, you will find some of recent and past examples and efforts and material to address and to debunk the solar myths. It is apparent that the majority of the existing efforts on debunking the myths on solar energy target improving social assistance at the general level from the lay public. The public concerns are commonly approached through dissemination of information and messages. The efforts range from spreading positive images of solar technologies to responding to the common concerns by publication of Q&A format information. The conveyed information and message are diverse in the level of details, from relatively generic contents to summarize of more technical knowledge. While such communication essentially tend to flow one way from expert to the unspecified audience, some recent initiatives adopt a more interactive approach, leveraging the enhanced accessibility of multimedia tools, for instance, YouTube and social networking sites, Facebook or Twitter. A review of the past and existing Debunking the Myth initiative, including those presented in this lecture, helps to identify the pitfalls they fell into debunking the myths. Particularly notable factors that they have seemingly undermined the success in renewable energy knowledge propagation and dissemination public concern are as follows. Efforts emphasized on myths, not on legitimate worries. There are many questions on market integration or electricity prices, or final disposal of batteries and systems that really need to be focused in responding to public concerns. Whereas a lot of our efforts has been put in emphasizing the clean nature of renewable energy. It's acknowledged that renewable energy experts tend to discount some important concerns that may be legitimate for the public to raise. Target audience is unclear. The majority of the efforts to disseminate relevant information cover the general audience with rather generic contents, while the aspect of market and community acceptance are largely neglected. Public concerns over renewable energy development at a specific location cannot always be mediated by the arguments of generic environmental, social, and economic benefits. Overlapping in cohesive efforts. The renewable energy community often fails to represent itself in a unity, as efforts have been not only scattered geographically and technologically, but also overlapping. Research findings quoted in communication materials are even sometimes contradicting. Lack in knowledge relevant to developing countries, whereas developing nations are experiencing a number of implementation challenges in renewable energy deployment that require high-level expertise to overcome. Most knowledge and experience provided by the advocates come from developed countries. It is not easy to identify efforts for understanding and improving social acceptance from developing nations, for instance, on solar home systems. Media engagement is poor. Even if the same fact is presented, two totally different stories can be written, one in favor of renewable energy and the other against, depending on how journalists interpret it. Those are called the lobby arguments. The advocates have not seized the opportunities to engage and help media to see the facts in a balanced manner, as well as to provide information and responses quickly at the right time. Opposition is underestimated. The conventional energy industry have a large spending and bargaining power to defend their interests by discounting the potential of renewable energy and stimulating anti-renewable sentiments among the public and decision makers. They may emphasize the aspects in renewable energy which look vulnerable or are still in development, while effectively taking advantage of the appealing points of renewable energy by claiming the cleanness of conventional and fossil sources. The second part of the lecture presents the findings on best practices for communicating renewables. Many governments and other stakeholders have developed communication strategies to improve understanding about renewable energies and communicate facts relating to renewable energy technologies. Although numerous examples of good practices in communication for renewables can be found, rigorous, well-planned, and adequately evaluated communication strategies are not the norm. We will now present the best practices in designing and implementing a communication campaign. First of all, partnering and financing. Partnership broaden the reach of communication and reduce costs, which is crucial in the context of renewable energy communication, which tend to have limited funding. Cooperating with like-minded institutions can increase human and financial resources available for the campaign, which in turn have the possibility of improving its design, reach, and overall effectiveness while simultaneously reducing cost burden for those involved. Partnering is critical. There is a lack of a unique voice for the solar sector. Pre-campaign research. Research builds in-depth understanding of target audience and provides insight into how best to communicate with them. Producing more effective communication, better preparation can also reduce the cost. Definition of objective. A renewable energy campaign will only be as targeted, measurable, and successful as its objective allow it to be. Precise and clearly defined campaign objectives have a number of advantages. First, they facilitate a more accurate evaluation of a strategy later on. Broad goals, such as that of awareness raising, are difficult to measure. Second, they generate more precise definition of target audience, in turn, enhancing a campaign's specific prospect of success. And finally, carefully defined objectives help the development of a tailored message needed to convince specific groups. Time planning and duration. Time is everything for renewable energy campaigns. Appropriate timing and duration are key to a campaign being perceived as relevant by this target audience. Longer campaigns are able to be effective distribution network for their messages. Fifth, audience definition and segmentation. Audience definition and segmentation, the beliefs, values, needs, desires, and interpretation of renewable energy and the deployment of renewable energy technologies vary widely between audience segments. A core principle of marketing is that the different people respond differently to what how information is presented. Most successful communication campaigns are the ones which tightly define their target audiences. Careful identification and segmentation of core audiences can avoid wasting time and money on groups unconcerned with or already convinced of the campaign's objectives. As mentioned previously, bear in mind the importance of the swing vote in general population. Some will never support renewable energy. Some will always do. Campaigns can affect most the views of those who remain undecided. In addition to addressing the undecided majority, communication campaigns, an important factor is to focus on influencers and opinion leaders, pioneers, who have the power to bring about the change. Campaign messaging. The most important guiding principle for the development of messaging include: message must be personally relevant and linked to audience context to maximize attention level. Message-provoking emotional responses tend to be more memorable and effective. Message should motivate individuals to become actively, cognitively engaged by means of unusual, unfamiliar, and novel presentation of content. Message should be short, simple, and salient. Detailed technical and factual information is less important. Individuals do not make classically rational decisions which should be taken into account when formulating messages. Individuals tend to value fairness and act prosocially, particularly if free reading can be minimized. Best practice in messaging is also to use behavioral economics. Behavioral economics uses insights from psychology to increase the explanatory power of economics and offers insights into how people interpret and respond to information. The status quo bias and the omission bias. Individuals have a strong bias against change and prefer harmful inaction over harmful action. An emphasis in communication on the cost of inaction could be a route to overcoming the omission bias by emphasizing how harmful inaction can be. The endowment effect. Individuals attach extra value to goods they already own or services they already receive and perceive the value of an object higher if they possess it than if they do not. People with a sense of ownership of local renewable energy resources will value them more highly than those who do not, which may reduce resistance to renewable energy deployment. Loss aversion. Individuals are more strongly motivated to avoid loss than acquire similar gain. Increased deployment of renewable energy is often associated with loss of cheap energy and loss of security of energy supply, both of which may feed into loss aversion and foster resistance to renewable energy. Hyperbolic discount. People are far-sighted when planning if both cost and benefit occur in the future, but make short-sighted decisions if costs or benefits are immediate. Given that benefits of mitigation climate change will be seen in the future and rising energy costs are an immediate cost, communicators must carefully consider how to frame these trade-offs by focusing on immediate benefits or reduce reliance on fossil fuels such as enhance energy security. Prosocial behavior and fairness. Individuals tend to value fairness and act prosocially. Raising awareness about the positive action of others in relation to renewable energy may be helpful in this regard. 7. Campaign creative. Aiming only to be heard or seen is not enough, particularly in a crowded arena such as energy policy. Renewable energy campaign must compete with communications about other energy sources and strive to be remembered and acted upon. Communication messages should be placed into compelling and memorable stories. Simply getting a target audience to hear or see a message is alone challenging, but ensuring they will remember it, let alone absorb it deeply enough to change their perception, is another issue altogether. Campaign channels. Effort must be made to match audience segments identified as particularly relevant to renewable energy deployment with communication channels they personally value and are exposed to. Successful campaigns should identify or create a distribution network for content, ensuring that each channel is well matched to its internet audience. Poorly functioning mechanisms for distribution of content or the content not being sufficiently compelling to generate impact resulted in a lack of interest, particularly in some web-based campaigns. Evaluation. Learning from your mistake is only an option if you know what mistakes were made. Evaluating communication practices allow organizations to assess whether the communication methods have been successful in meeting their defined objectives and will provide information that will allow communication strategies to be refined in the future. An important shortcoming of many campaigns is that original objectives were not well defined, so it was difficult to define success for the campaign. Additionally, evaluations are often not budgeted for and therefore were not carried out. Proactive response to negative media coverage. There are many misconceptions and negative options expressed about renewable energy in the media, and these should be addressed to enhance understanding and perception of renewable energy. It was generally observed that the negative media campaigns which have created the need for renewable energy communication activism in some national contexts were never addressed directly. Renewable energy communication should actively engage with individuals, journalists, and politicians, and institutions that publish falsehoods in open fora. Concluding remarks. We can now conclude that best practices to debunk the solar myths are: avoid reinforcing the myths, focus on facts, on benefits and advantage. Core facts should be presented visually. Target the undecided majority rather than unswayable minority. Publish arguments according to level of audience. Engage specialized media and opinion leaders in briefings and dialogue. And finally, proactively participate in public debate. At this point, we come to the end of the second lecture on debunking the myths. I would like to thank you for your attention. You are invited to test your understanding of the contents in the following small quiz. Thank you.